So did you like start by running track in high school or something like that? Or like when did you first get into running?
That is a funny question because most people assume I've been in track,
Yeah.
and I have not. I, ironically enough, tried out for the track team in high school, made week one, went to the first week of practice, and decided it wasn't for me.
Really?
I was so intimidated by the language they used, the tempo and speed work, and the hill training.
Mm-hmm.
Literally, I think I actually attended one session,
Mm-hmm.
and I happened to pick the session that was hills.
Yeah. So did they have you pegged as like a middle distance runner or something like that?
No, it was really probably more sprints and shorter distance.
Oh, okay.
But I hadn't gotten immersed
Yeah.
long enough
Mm-hmm.
for really any determination on what was my preferred distance at that point.
Right.
It was kind of on a whim. I had won, sort of one of those presidential awards in my class at the time, and had like the fastest mile for a girl in my class and thought that was great.
Do you remember what the time was?
I do not. No, I just remember thinking, yeah, I beat most of the boys too. No, so I really don't have a background in running.
Yeah.
I discovered running in college.
Okay.
It was as an adult.
But going back to when you were a kid, is it something that you just always kind of came naturally to you? I mean, like, did you spend a lot of time playing outside, or like, how did you, like, because a lot of times people, their attitudes towards running, they start when they're younger, and they can say, either I like running or I don't, I should say I struggle with it or I don't.
Right. I never minded running, but I would say I was actually a bike person. I loved the bike and was always on the bike with my brother and in the neighborhood and other kids. We did live in the country for quite a bit of our upbringing. And so, being on your 2 feet, exploring in nature and being out in the woods was absolutely something I loved and enjoyed.
Okay.
And of course, via 2 feet, right?
Right.
I think nowadays more kids spend more time behind screens than anything. And
They do.
We just didn't have screens
Yeah.
or screen time back then. So it
Right.
was everything was outside play on your feet.
And really all you need is, I guess, a decent pair of shoes, and some people say you don't even need that, right?
Correct, yes.
Have you ever tried any of those shoes that are like supposed to be like your feet are actually running any distance barefoot or anything like that?
So I do not wear some of those technical shoe and footwear options that are more known as like Vibram shoes.
Yeah.
I wear the Ultras, which are probably just an extension, just a little bit outside of those, I guess what you want to call natural foot shoes. So they have what they call a zero drop. And zero drop means you're basically next to the ground running with your own foot form, your own foot splay. You have a little bit of a barrier and cushion there to help you. But at the end of the day, you still get a lot of the benefits like you would be if you were almost barefoot running. So it was a progression, though, to get there. Your feet are so used to being in footwear of a specific kind your entire life, and then all of a sudden you switch to something that's very natural, and we're not used to it. Our feet are not used to it. We don't have the strength in our feet and our bones and so it can cause a lot of issues if you're not cautious about it and careful about how you, analyzing how you run, your gait, all of those things. So it's just fascinating and complex. But I have recently started shifting a bit away from those and going back to sort of the normal footwear and just trying various things. I feel like I'm a little bit of my own self-experiment in that, figuring out what works for me, what doesn't, what challenges me, what helps me grow those muscles and just give me different outcomes.
Yeah. So how did you discover running in college then?
Without getting into too much of the weeds,
Right.
it really was a matter of health matters for me. Physically, everybody always looks at me and thinks, oh, you're thin, you're fit, you look in shape. Metabolically, I think there's so much more behind people that we don't recognize. And at the time, I was suffering from a great deal of some health concerns that were debilitating. And really, I got into this path of figuring out what do I need to do for myself, and taking my own ownership of my own health. And the easiest way as a broke college student was to go get a pair of shoes, slip them on, and out the door you go. So I really discovered the love of running in college. I was next to a roommate who was up religiously every day at 5 a.m. getting her runs in before we had class sessions, and I was always that one that hit the snooze 3 times and could never understand what her drive was for running until I kind of encountered some of these health issues, and then it forced me to really evaluate how I could take and course correct that on my own. And part of that was just getting my body moving, having a stress outlet, and having a way to effectively just release life and not have that bottled up in me. So it was I would say she was a heavy influence on that. And then here, fast forward a few years, I was the one getting up at 5 a.m., not hitting snooze anymore, and really just trying to get out the door and stay disciplined in just that path.
So when you started, I mean, like oftentimes what they recommend is like a run walk, and then you do a little bit of running, and then so on and so forth. Did you have the same type of...
Oh, no.
No.
No. I think there's this piece of naivety when you start something.
Yeah.
You want to be the sponge and absorb all these things, but at the same token, you're almost headstrong enough to be like, oh, I can do this. I can figure it out. So I literally did not use a run plan. My goal and my sole focus was to literally run 3 miles in 30 minutes. That was my goal. Okay. I just kind of arbitrarily put that out there and thought, 5Ks are about 3 miles. Seems like a good qualified distance. Why not just go for 3 miles in 30 minutes? Seems very attainable.
Yeah.
Seems doable.
How quickly did you hit that?
Oh, gosh. Yeah, that didn't come so easy.
No, okay.
No,
yeah.
I trained almost exclusively on a treadmill for over a year.
Oh.
And it was all I could do, no joke, to get my time down to about 3 miles and 40 minutes.
Wow. Okay.
And so by the end of that year, I was cresting a little closer and a little closer to that 30-minute time frame.
Yeah.
But it just felt like an eternity back then. It just felt like it was forever.
So that's like 3 miles and 40 minutes would be like is that like a 13-minute mile or something?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So on the treadmill, did you have it on what is that, 6? Or
a little slower than that. I think it was like 8 or something.
Okay,
but
yeah.
I mean, and it's different as, you get into running, you realize the efficiency and the mechanisms of your body just operate differently when you're naturally running versus on a treadmill. And then every style of treadmill is different and unique. So there were a lot of challenges. I started giving myself these shin splint issues and started giving myself, because also, I mean, to that point, anyone that knows much about running or gets into running will say, oh gosh, those goals are great, but it's the mode of how you make those happen and achieve. And my sole focus every time I showed up was literally to run all out. Run all out for 3 miles. Just bust out those 3 miles, get it in as fast and as hard as I could. And as as you put that kind of demand in your body, it catches up. So then you start having some what we call niggles in the running community. Little pains here, little tweaks there, issues with things. You start feeling the fatigue. You start feeling really tired. It just becomes to this point of you're asking too much. You have to think about recovery. You have to think about easy days. It's okay if you're not putting your body under a time trial every time you show up on the treadmill.
So what kind of guidance did you get? I mean, in this early phase of your running?
I was just so green and so eager to get my hands on anything and everything. I was in Runner's World magazine. I was, at the time, there wasn't much data and information out there on the web, but more and more was starting to be unveiled. Running kind of seemed like it was taking off a bit more, and so there was a lot more material out there. I was reading every book I could get my hands on. I was reading every article. I was evaluating. I was trying to put my plan together. So I really started pulling free plans essentially from the internet and that were offered to help guide me from what I mentally kind of could assess myself with and then really execute. So I started working off of just free plans out there.
Yeah. And how much time passed between the time that you started running and the time that you ran your first? Because just a little preview here. Wendy's a 100-miler. Okay, so we're that's like 4 marathons in a row, basically. So I don't want to, I want to get to the 100-mile stuff. So I'll say, how much time passed between the first time that you started running and the time that you did your first marathon, which I know is not a big deal, it's but
yeah, a little hop, skipping and jumping in there.
Yeah.
That was in college. I really found the love for running.
Okay.
And I continued with that until I had babies. And when I say that, I actually had trained up to my peak weeks for marathon training.
Yeah.
When I first found out I was pregnant with my very first.
Okay.
And at that point, the doctors were like, "Nope, can't do it. You can't run anymore. Don't train for that marathon.
Yeah.
Bad news. You shouldn't do this while you're pregnant.
Yeah.
Back off." All those things that us women hear so much about with our health. And so I did. I just reeled it in. And that happened not once, but ironically twice.
Really?
So fast forward another couple years. Decided after baby 1, okay, great. Getting into the rhythm of life, figuring things out. And then peak week, find out I'm pregnant again. So I just decided maybe this is God's way of saying now is not the timing in the life for Wendy's pursuits here.
Okay.
And so I pulled back for several years, continued my training, just continued to train and keep my foundation there and really find ways I could involve my children in the stroller along the way.
Sure.
And so fast forward a few years and it was, 2019. So by this time, my firstborn was 9, and that was my first marathon. I trained myself again with a free training plan.
Okay.
And got myself to the starting line of Grandma's Marathon as my very first marathon.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
And
you did 2019 because I signed up to do the Grandma's Marathon in 2020, and I did it, but it was a virtual marathon.
Yes.
So you got in the year before where they actually ran the marathon.
Yes. That was such a really pivotal time was when COVID hit and it changed the running community completely. And so it was my goal to actually come back to 2020 and Boston qualify.
Yeah.
So
you were going to Boston qualify in your second marathon?
Yeah, I had trained myself to my first marathon and I was within minutes of Boston qualifying.
Wow.
And did far better than I had ever actually hoped and aspired to.
And again, just for people who don't know, the Boston Marathon is sort of like looked at as sort of like the mecca of all marathons in the country because you can't just sign up for it and get on a waiting list and all that stuff. You have to qualify, and there are several marathons, and Grandma's is one of them, that serve as qualifying events. I mean, I know there's lots of different ways you can do it over time and everything, but if you hit a certain number, you're basically in, right? But the number is so hard to hit that because they don't want to have just your average fast runner in there. It's a hard number. I mean, what is the number?
It is. So it's all based on your age. So the younger you are, admittedly, it's a lot tougher to get in.
Sure.
And at that point, I had just turned 40.
Okay.
So that buffer had given me a little bit of a leg up as well. But for that age group, I had to hit a 340 or better, and I had just come in at 343.
Ooh. Now, did you have it in your mind? You knew that was the number on that first marathon, and were you really gunning for it, or did it just you ran the marathon and you realized, oh, whoa, I almost qualified for Boston?
Yeah, it really was more organic. Like I just didn't think it was possible. I was almost my own barrier in my mind.
Okay.
And thought, I know what I'm capable of. I know what I can do. I'm going to just give it my best shot and see what unfolds. And honestly, my training had actually indicated that I was more likely to hit a 350 or slower.
Okay.
And so, hitting 343, I was absolutely elated. I just thought, this is phenomenal.
Yeah.
I couldn't have asked for more for my first experience.
Do you think if you would have known that, you were that close that you could have dug deep and found another
Absolutely.
level.
And I think that's where the key piece of like having a coach and having a plan and being able to have somebody objectively help look at things and give you some of those tips and pointers is so amazing and such a great tool and resource to get you to those next kind of barriers or overcoming those barriers for sure. Yeah. So then the pandemic hit, and as you know, when you sign up for grandmas, all the races got canceled that year. And so it was at kind of that 2019 to 2020 that I had started getting introduced on the online community to the trail running community.
Yeah.
And one thing led to another. I ended up doing a marathon trail distance in North Carolina as my first trail and trail race, and ended up placing third, my very first trail marathon.
Wow.
And I thought, gosh, I'm really just proving myself here that I have got a lot more in me than I ever thought.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when the races were canceled, I decided I'm going to try something really intriguing additionally to that, in not just exploring the trail community, but I decided to start a run streak. And that run streak, essentially a run streak is that you run and maintain at least a minimum of 1 mile a day, every day. And I did that for 446 days until 2021's grandmas. And then I decided, okay, I finally got my Boston qualifier at that one.
Yeah.
And
you did?
I did get my Boston qualifier, my second marathon.
Okay.
And I also decided I'm going to hang up the road shoes for a bit, even though I just hit a Boston qualifier, and I'm going to just go immerse myself out in the woods and the trails and the community. I just found a love and joy for that community. And one thing kind of just led to another. It just kind of snowballed from there. I went and did my first 50K. I ended up placing second female, and all the placements aside, that didn't really so much matter to me.
50K is like, what, 32 miles somewhere?
Yeah, it's like 31.3 miles officially.
Yeah, that was pretty good for a person who doesn't know anything about the metric system.
Although trails are so... They're not spot on all the time. It's very hard to get that accuracy.
Well, I want to get into it, but before I do that, so how long does the qualifying time buy you to get into Boston?
Yeah,
you have to do it that year?
Yeah, you have 1 year.
Did you wind up doing it?
I did not end up doing Boston's.
Okay.
My heart and soul was just calling me elsewhere, so I tabled it. I never made it to Boston.
But you can. I mean, if you wanted to, you could go back and qualify again and get in there.
I could. Yeah. I've actually qualified twice since my very first.
Okay.
And I've just chosen not to pursue those. If you go and explore Boston, it can be really not even just the challenge to get in, but it's an expense and a commitment all on its own.
Sure.
I wasn't sure if I was ready for that, and that's where my drive was, is to go participate in that.
So okay, so now you're into trail running. What are some of the key differences between road running and trail running, just from let's say a difficulty standpoint?
Road running just does not have a lot of the variables and the unknowns in front of you. And when I say that, it's your terrain, it's your elevation.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at road charts and it's very cut and dry, and you know exactly what to expect from an elevation gain chart.
Yeah. The only variable really is the weather, right?
Exactly. Right. It's so controlled, and, everybody's out there chasing speed. It is a very focused, I shouldn't say everyone, don't let me categorize everyone, but for the majority, people are after, a specific time or a goal, and it's really a lot around speed. And so, going to the trail community was really vast and different. I mean, you're spending multi-hours out there on the trails. So same distance can take you twice as long to cover.
That was what I was wondering, yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
so it's harder.
you're looking at elevation, you're
Right.
looking at different terrain, you've got rocks, roots,
Mud.
now you've got, yes, the weather added into that, all that. You've got mud, you've got slick, you've got depth of things that you can't always even see, where all of a sudden you're 10 feet flat on your face out in front of you because you just tripped on something you didn't see. So
Insects.
oh, yeah. I mean, you name it. You've got the flies, you've got the mosquitoes, you've got the ticks, especially in Minnesota. I mean, it just, and then you've got unknowns in places like rattlesnakes and, you know,
Sure.
you've got the wildlife, nature surrounding you. You come across it all the time.
And you're out there going long distances, you probably wind up getting pretty far away from your vehicle or your home wherever you started, right?
To that point, it takes a lot more logistics and planning.
Yeah.
And preparing. So you are having to be self-supportive and self-sufficient in so many ways.
Yeah.
You have to be thinking about the pack you're wearing, what you're bringing, how many hours you anticipate being out there. What if something does go wrong? You know, do you have an emergency kit? Do you have access? Do you have even, you know, the service to get a hold of?
Yeah, right.
Someone
I
if
got
you
my
needed
cell
them.
phone, but no service,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, I've been out in the woods a few times and luckily have had service. And myself, I haven't had an injury, you know, knock on wood. But I've come across other runners who've been injured, who have either taken a complete fall and cracked their head on a rock and they're sitting there with blood in their hand, you know, and so you're the one that's, hey, let me call for help,
Sure.
you know. So it can be, or you could be in a really remote place where you just don't come across a lot of runners, you know, in general.
Yeah, I mean, it can just be kind of creepy being out there sometimes, right?
Oh, there's
Yeah.
definitely eerie moments.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah, you've got the fog and the whole, you know, different elements that play into it, unknown areas you've been on by foot. Things just look different when you're on foot than even when you're in a vehicle and you're traveling somewhere. It just, your whole view of things changes dramatically.
Are there a lot of places to do this kind of training in this area?
Surprisingly, yes and no. And I say that because, of course, if anyone knows Minnesota, we are flat.
Yeah.
Flat. So when it comes to the actual vertical gain that most trail runners are chasing after, we don't have a lot. But from a actual trail community perspective, there are quite a few. Everything from the Duluth Superior area
Sure.
all the way across the state. We have, you know, even here in this community, the Heartland Trail.
Yeah.
There's the Horse Trail that parallels the Heartland, which often suffices as a really great training ground if you want to be kind of in that nature and trail feel.
Yeah. Because people who train for the road race on the trail itself, but then,
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
And then there's the North Country Trail. Now, mind you, that's not always well groomed or
I mean it's a big job there.
So you might be doing a little bushwhacking, as I've experienced a little in the past. But
that's all in the game though, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it adds to the adventure and just the element of the unknown and trying something new. So
so eventually you decide whatever this 50K is not enough, and you ramp it all the way up to 100 miles. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
So what got into your head to say, I'm going to do a 100-mile race? And then which was the first one that you've done, if you've done multiple, and how did it go?
So, I really just continued to think about those barriers that I had in my brain. And it was thinking about, we are our probably worst limiter in so many ways. We are our own barrier. It's like, get out of your own way. And so I had really been methodical about evaluating if 100 even really called me and really felt like it was a place I wanted to explore and go.
Right.
And I actually got to pace one of my good friends for her first 100-miler in Alabama. And it was at that point that I thought, I can do this. I can do this. And I don't know when, but I will do this. And so I finally, after a lot of research, a lot of exploring, a lot of evaluating, I really wanted to align something that felt very parallel to the training ground that I get to train on every day. And fortunately, there are some really great flat 100 milers, and I sought out one of the Ornery Mule Racing team's races, which is in Illinois, and it's the Hennepin 100. That was my first 100 miler last year in October, and I actually did it over the weekend of my birthday. So it was, I guess, quote unquote, my birthday celebration weekend to myself was running a 100-mile race.
So what are the rules of the 100-mile race?
You know,
like, do you have to complete it within a certain amount of time, or like how does it what are like how do you get into one?
There's so much more gray with trail racing too.
Okay.
So there's a sort of this like structure with trails and distances. It really depends on the number of people that show up. So some of them are what they consider Western states qualifiers. That's sort of the elite of all elite stateside races that everybody tries to get into for
that's where you get that belt buckle, right?
Yes. So, and in several of those other races will provide belt buckles.
Oh,
I
I
got a nice belt buckle from the 100 there.
Oh, you did? Yeah. Oh, good. Yeah.
I should have wore it today actually, but I decided to go for the shirt, instead. Yeah. So you have to complete the Hennepin 100 in under 30 hours.
Okay, so it's not just a one-day thing. Because I think Western states it has to be one day, right?
So Western states, in order to even get in, you have to have a certain number of tickets or being drawn from their lottery.
Okay.
And historically, it takes over 7 years for the average person to get in with at least one ticket a year. And those tickets sort of double every year over. It's a really complex kind of lottery system, if you will. And so, there's only like 200 runners that get selected to run this race. And so the odds are, and the numbers are, behind it, that it takes about 7 years to get in.
Do you keep getting a better and better chance every year?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. If you keep continuing to build those tickets towards it, you definitely
so your tickets stay in until
Correct.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, and that I think has changed a little bit over the years too. So Hennepin 100 was a flat course.
Yep.
It was similar to the Heartland Trail locally that I get to train on. It did not have the paved section, so it was all unpaved, but it runs along the Hennepin Canal and does sort of this out and back, almost upside down T. Really cool, course in itself. Beautiful along the canal.
Sure.
But equally as hard because of that flat. Your body is literally undergoing the same impact for 100 miles. You have no variation in your terrain.
That's interesting. So it's actually, even if there were a slight incline, that might actually be helpful.
Mechanically, then your body is challenged to use different muscles and different things to, effort.
Yeah.
So
you're resting some muscles as you're running uphill.
Yeah. And
I've never thought of that before. Yeah.
And the thing about trails that everybody kind of wonders, like, oh, how fast do you run them, and what's your average pace like? And it's really hard to actually respond to that, because when you think about elevation and hills, you're not really running up the hills. You're power hiking. So there's a lot of variation. You might bust down those hills at a 7.5 minute pace. You might find a flat section and be able to crank out the speed.
Yeah.
And then you're power hiking up the next 3/4 mile, 3,000 elevation gain over the course of the next few miles. So it's really a lot of variability there in your speed and pace.
Yeah.
Whereas running Hennepin was a flat, it would be like running a marathon, essentially.
Yeah. But then running
for
another one, and then another one, and then another one.
Yeah.
So okay. I want to talk about nutrition too, but and gear. But I guess what I'm most interested about from a person who's running 100 miles, like, are you listening to music, or like are you just lost in your thoughts, or like what's going on in your head during this? Like what's going on in your head when you finish that first 25 miles and say to yourself, I'm not even halfway done.
One thing that I have learned to train the mind as much as you train the body. So that is half the problem, is that you have to literally work on training the mind. And so you're physically capable of more than what you think you can be. And so the challenge is, I didn't look at it as, I've only completed a marathon. It's always just, what mile am I in? and where am I at, and just continually reevaluate and assess. And really part of that journey is you have to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
You have to be able to say, what do I need to continue at this level for the remainder of this time?
Nutrition.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, nutrition's huge. I mean, they have buffets out there for our aid stops. So, I mean, you've got everything.
Do you like to eat solid foods or gels or just drinks or like I know everything, it's different for everybody, right?
It's still a trial and error, to be honest.
Yeah.
That is probably the one big area that's always inevitably the area that people can learn the most from and continue to explore and actually get better at.
Yeah.
And for me, I love it all. I'll eat whole foods. I'll do peanut butter sandwiches. I'll do pineapple, watermelon. I'll do liquid nutrition, everything from liquid calories, tailwind nutrition to help support everything from, those gels everybody talks about. I am an ambassador for Honey Stinger brand currently and have trained with them for, 6-7 years.
Okay.
Love their products, although you can only eat so much honey-based product before your palate just gets gross after a while. So I've really experimented in the last year, and through that 100, it was about trying as many nutritional products as I could.
Yeah.
And have really got to understand and identify my palate changes and how much things really can depend on the time and point you are at in the race. Sometimes you're just like, oh, I can't do any more of that. Just I need something else to, be in my palate. So
do you have like a kind of a general plan going into a race like that? I'm going to eat this at this mile. I'm going to eat that at this mile. Or does it all just kind of get thrown out or whatever?
Calorie and carb intake. The goal is always 80 plus grams of carbs and 250 to 350 calories an hour. And now that's very personal to me.
Yeah.
So everybody has to find what works for them. And the goal is to always be trying to push the envelope with that.
Okay. Yeah. So, and then as far as like your gear, because I imagine, part of this probably gets taken care of in training too, but I imagine that your feet start to hurt. Right?
Yeah.
And don't you start to get blisters at a certain point and then
you can.
Okay.
I've worked through that in previous distances.
Yeah.
I've definitely had my share of black toenails, swollen feet, blisters, and I've discovered toe socks work the best for me.
Okay.
And I use squirrel's nut butter so I'm throwing all these name brands and all these products. Before long you could be a product junkie with getting really in deep with it. But yes, everybody has to find. Some people just never struggle with that.
Right.
I did a footwear change at my 100. I knew it was actually an abnormally hot day that day. It was 90 plus degrees.
Wow.
And they had hit record high temps. And
does it start at 5 a.m.? Or when is it?
We started at 7 a.m.
Okay.
So early, but not quite early enough to battle that heat. And then earlier, I noticed I was much quicker on the pace than I had maybe thought I was going to feel comfortably running for quite some time.
Yeah.
So I was taking in more calories than I probably had originally planned to try to stay ahead of just the dehydration. There were people dropping in the race already at 50 miles because they were overheating, dehydrated, having a lot of GI distress issues.
Sure.
Just all those issues that kind of are precursors to a lot of times and often what will take people out of a race. And so it was my goal was to just try to get through that. So I use a gear pack. I try to train with all the things that I would do for race day.
So what are you carrying with you during a race like that?
Yeah, you're carrying all your fluids. You're carrying all your nutrition.
It's like a backpack or like a...
Yeah, they're hydration vests.
Hydration vest? Okay.
Yeah, and I love having as much on me and accessible as I can. Now, for my 100, I did drop it at the 50K mark. I decided this heat is unbearable, and I just cannot fathom carrying any more weight or heaviness on me. So I ended up hand carrying for the bulk of the daytime hours and then utilizing pockets for all of my gels and all my extras, and then just relied on my crew team every time I came into the aid stations to make sure I was refueled, ready to go, took in some extra salt and calories, and then off I went.
You carry a phone with you or anything like that, or just...
I personally love carrying my phone.
Yeah.
One, for tracking, but two, just, I don't know if it's kind of like my security blanket,
Yeah,
honestly.
right.
I mean, if I ever got off course, got lost, needed help,
Sure.
in between aid stations, there's typically, up to 10 miles between aid stations. So you're not super accessible in a lot of those places. There's no
10
way
to 12
for...
miles between aid stations. Okay. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And some races are really good about putting them closer together. But there's still 3 to 5 miles in between that you're really just, relying on the next runner to come by and then fill in the aid station people like, oh, somebody's on the trail back there that can't move or is debilitated or whatever the case may be.
Right.
Or hurt,
right.
so.
Sure. So, okay, so you got your phone. And then, I mean, are you listening to music or are you just kind of lost in your thoughts?
Yeah, you had asked about the music.
Yeah.
I used to be an avid music lover. And now I would say because of just being more aware.
Yeah.
And just all the nuances in the trails, I love just being immersed in nature.
Okay.
And so, to be honest, I did not put my earbuds in until I was on mile 91
Wow.
of the race. And that's when the real pain set in.
Yeah.
It was...
91 miles, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was midnight, if I remember. And I thought,
Yeah.
I have been running for this many hours already. And I'm just finally feeling this fatigue set in. Thought the night was going to cool down, and it did not. The humidity and the heat still stayed high even after the sunset.
That's got to be
And
disappointing.
it just got to this point of your body's exhausted.
So you just needed that extra little boost there.
I did.
Kind of at the
I
end.
thought, I can just put the beats on, and I can just crank it. And at that point, I think I had been hallucinating a little bit because...
Yeah.
I had witnessed 2 raccoons that came across the trail and scared me half to death. I squealed like a 2-year-old and leapt about 20 feet in the air. And next thing you know, I'm looking over going, okay, was I just seeing that or did that just really happen?
Yeah.
And...
Well, you got to think there's got to be some degree of that, like cracking up a little bit mentally, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And just not taking anything too serious and realizing you are so small on this earth and this planet and this being and just surrounded by so much out of your control.
Yeah.
And just leaving it.
Do you ever get lost in your thoughts to the point where a significant amount of time or distance can pass before you basically come to again and say, wow, I just ran 20 miles or something?
Yeah, they call that like the runner's high often that hits you, and absolutely it's hit me.
Yeah.
Where I could just feel like I could run forever and ever, and it just feels so euphoric and so meditative at the same time, where you just go, when things click like that, you want to take full advantage and just keep going.
You just feel like totally in control.
Yeah. I mean, it's just...
It's a good feeling.
It's an indescribable feeling until you have felt that.
Yeah.
Where, and you want others to feel that. I think that's where I'm so passionate about running and just the endurance training of what I've learned, how it parallels in life.
Sure.
So
and now you're a coach.
Yes.
But before we get there, I do want to get there for sure, but I just wanted to talk about crossing the finish line on that 100-mile and then kind of what happened afterwards. So
there was nothing more special and meaningful than crossing that finish line, because it really was me breaking down that mental barrier for myself to say, I can do hard things and I can make this happen.
Well,
and I just did
this
it.
is not a marathon is a hard thing. This is an insane thing, right? I can do an insanely hard thing.
Yes, correct. The thing about ultras, and particularly 100, is that it's where you can really push those limits and barriers mentally and challenge yourself. And I love the challenge. I've always loved challenges in life. And so, yes, crossing that finish line at 2 in the morning. So I had, just realized I was the first female to cross the finish line on top of that.
Wow.
In 19 hours and 10 minutes.
Okay.
And it was almost surreal.
Yeah.
I almost had no emotion, but all of the emotions crossing the finish line.
Yeah.
Because I was so physically depleted and mentally exhausted from focusing for that many hours.
Right.
And through the heat. I mean, the heat just takes a whole nother toll on you. And I crossed that finish line and just, you know, it was such an amazing experience. I couldn't help but just recognize all that had gone on up to that point to help me achieve and accomplish that.
Like thinking back even to like your college roommate or, you know.
Yeah, all the details, that all the
like your
little
life flashes
pieces.
before your eyes.
Yeah, it really did. And just even the support of my family. Like the sacrifices that not just I took, but my whole family took to not only be there for me.
Because your husband and kids are now,
My husband was there to meet me at every aid station he could be at. He was at the finish line, crossing the finish line. It just was such an incredible experience.
Sure. So you cross that finish line, you're going through all these emotions. Are you continuing to walk? I mean, you're
barely.
Okay. So then what's
I was hobbling.
Like, you were hobbling.
Yeah.
So then and your husband's there.
Yeah.
So then like you get into the vehicle and then head to the hotel? Is that basically how that worked?
You know, the Hennepin 100 is just so well organized and so set up successfully, in my opinion. I love Michelle Hartwig, who runs the Orner Mule races. I've run a couple of other Orner Mule races, and she just does a phenomenal job of just working with the community at large. And so the Kelowna Fire Department, where the finish line ends, supported the finish line literally just up the hill. Now, that was the biggest hill and the worst hill I had to climb.
Of course.
I literally was on all fours climbing the hill with my husband trying to help me up the hill. They offered their fire department up to us runners crossing the finish line for a recovery respite. They had the showers there offered. They had mats and cots and everything there for us runners. At the finish line, they had chili and all sorts of warm, hearty food. So it was just like all you want to do is just eat all the food and literally at the same time fall on the ground and sleep the rest of your life away.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I did.
Was it air conditioned when you went into the fire station?
I don't even
I was
remember
wondering
if
how
it
much
was.
it felt that to hit that air conditioning.
I just remember feeling the hit of the shower, like, oh, this feels amazing, but I can't move to actually
Right. Yeah.
So it was a really nice experience. And then my husband and we actually stayed at a nearby campground with our kids, and we got a chance to then just take our time, getting done with the finish, kind of get some recognition in terms of, you know, saying congrats to other racers finishing the race as well. And you kind of socialize, and then we took off, and it was just like, okay, get me to bed.
Yeah.
But you're also in so much pain.
So how did you sleep that night?
I did not sleep at all.
Yeah.
Yes. No, that was really challenging.
Right.
The delayed onset muscle, symptoms, I guess, if you will. I don't know that you can consider it that when it's so immediate, though, because your body's been mechanically moving for so many hours. You come to such a sudden stop. Everything hits you so hard and fast. So the aches in my legs were just almost unbearable. It almost felt like an out-of-body experience where my legs weren't even attached to me. And so I just felt like I needed someone to be my stability every time I took a step anywhere. I needed like a walking cane. I didn't have one. It was just really challenging for probably the next 12 to 14 hours to get moving. It was very slow.
So you'd be like laying down and then getting up. That must have been excruciating.
It
right?
was very painful. Yeah.
So how much time passed before you actually felt normal again?
You know, I really take a lot of pride in my recovery. And so part of that is, of course, adequately taking in enough nutrition, recovering with post-recovery, all the things. And It was probably a good 24 hours before I felt like
Oh, I thought you were
actually-
going to say like 2 weeks.
No, surprisingly,
Yeah.
in the past it has been.
Uh-huh.
And I would say, so I took 7 full days off after that.
Okay.
I did nothing. I literally just maybe did like a walk to the mailbox and back. That was it,
Yeah.
which is half-mile walk. So, I mean, I kept everything very minimal. It was really more about just keeping the mechanics moving and not stiffening up too much. So that was really the recovery of it for me. And I've really practiced through every single ultra I've completed. It's been, how do I expedite the recovery process? Now that means more with not just the aches and pains, but mentally as well.
Yeah.
And so I do try to honor and recognize giving myself that ability to say, okay, I'll go for a test run maybe 7, 8, 10 days in. But if I'm not there, I'm not showing up for the right reasons, right
Just
way.
give yourself a little bit
I
of
need a
grace
little more
there,
time.
yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
So how many of these have you completed?
So that was my first and only.
Okay.
And I'm actually training for my next 100 coming up in June.
Okay.
I am towing the line at Kettle Moraine, which is another Ornery Mule Racing team's race series.
And where is that?
And that is in Wisconsin on the Kettle Moraine and Ice Age Trail. So super excited about that. I've actually just started ramping up my 12-week plan here.
Yep.
And yeah, it's gonna be a different kind of race. I'll be actually dealing with more elevation. I'll be a little bit,
Which could be a relief, right?
yeah. And the good thing is I do know this course fairly well because I ran the Ice Age 50 and I've ran the Kettle Moraine 100K last year.
What town is it like that it's centered around?
LaGrange, Wisconsin.
LaGrange, okay.
So I don't even know if it can really be considered a town. It looks like there's maybe 5 houses.
Okay, yeah.
And a trailhead.
Yeah.
So
It's kind of like a saloon and a, a post office maybe.
Yeah, I think the nearby town there is maybe about 15 or 20 minutes away from the trailhead. So it's pretty remote, but it is beautiful.
Okay.
I mean, probably next to the Superior hiking trail and Superior races that I've ran twice, it is got to be one of the most beautiful.
I think I've seen that before. I mean, I've seen like you're now crossing this or something, driving, eastward, like through like, I don't know, does 94 cross it or something?
Exactly. When you're headed to Milwaukee, you could be.
Yes. That's what I think. Yeah.
You could be crossing over the Kettle Moraine forest area.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because I have some friends in Milwaukee. I drove out there the last 2 summers. I'm sure that's what it was. So, okay. And so when you're training for something like that, you might do a marathon as a training run or something.
Correct.
Yeah.
It's always a goal. I try to at least get
So you
a
gonna run
couple
Grandma's
marathons
too, or
behind me. Grandma's is the week after this race.
Okay.
So
no.
as much as I have FOMO, fear of missing out, I would love to be at Grandma's. It just wasn't in the cards this year, and the way my training has kind of gone a little bit unexpected and unpredicted this year. I had my first injury that I have ever really experienced that actually took me out of running for a few weeks earlier this season. And it was a little new to me to navigate, but I do believe all things happen for a reason. And so part of me just realized, okay, maybe that wasn't the plan. I have to release my expectations of what that plan originally was going to look like. But I hope to try to get to Grandma's. I have a lot of friends and acquaintances that are running Grandma's this year.
That it's if you're in that level.
Just to cheer them on and be there as a coach for others as well. So, yeah.
What about isn't there like, doesn't Fargo run theirs relatively early? Or
I think theirs is in May, so I could probably consider jumping into that.
Yeah.
I get to be really picky and selective about where I put myself with racing and how it lines up with my training.
Sure.
So if it doesn't align, I tend not to say yes.
Yeah.
Although I love racing. I think racing is a great test to really see all that work kind of put forth.
That's funny is that you look at the Fargo Marathon, you look at that as a race. Like, right, most people are looking at it like, I'm just going to try to survive this thing and get across the finish line. Yeah, but that's fine. That's just it's an interesting perspective, but it's more about training for you than anything else.
Yeah, I love the training. Honestly, things you learn through training.
So now you're a running coach.
Yes.
A certified running coach.
Certified running coach officially.
Okay.
I feel like I've kind of been sort of a on the side running coach for a few years in my journey and just never really officially made that commitment to fulfilling that recognition piece for myself.
Yeah.
And I recently just decided I've got to make this happen. These are dreams, aspirations, goals that are not going away. I've been now running for 20 plus years.
Yep.
And I feel like with the amount of knowledge and experiences I'm gaining year over year, and especially in my 40s, I'm officially a master runner, which for anyone who doesn't know that, I know the master. Anyone over the age of 40 is a master runner.
Nice.
So
Okay.
yes, I'm like, okay, now I've officially made it into a new age bracket bucket. So
a master. Yeah, I like it.
there's just so much that you naively don't know unless you're working with a coach as well, that can be such a great guide and source of just objectivity and guidance on how to make the smallest tweaks and adjustments to see success. And there's nothing greater and better. I've worked with a coach for years, and I have seen the value and the benefits that it's brought me in and outside of running. Just that mentorship and that partnership and that communication and navigating life's day-to-day hurdles and challenges. So there was nothing more exciting for me than to just essentially announce that I've gotten my certification and I'm officially tapping into that space, and more specifically really focused on women entering their 40s and beyond.
Okay, I was going to ask you, who is your
women.
ideal pupil?
Yeah, I really am passionate. There's so little known on women's health. Everything is always connected back to men's health and clinical trials around men and trying to interpret that for women. There's just such a huge space and understanding that needs to be explored with women's health. And I have myself been enduring some of those health complications in my 40s. And so I thought there needs to be more talk about this. There needs to be more out there on this. And I am just so thrilled and excited to share more of that with other athletes who might be questioning, like, why am I not seeing a difference in my race performance? Why am I feeling this way? So fatigued. I've always trained this way. Or
so you're looking for someone who's a competitive runner to take them to the next step, right?
Ideally, it would be somebody who's already immersed in the running community in some way. So, absolutely I can work with someone couch to 5K. It's maybe not my sweet spot.
Yeah.
I'm really looking for somebody who is already there and maybe just with those lifestyle adjustments that they're, undergoing.
Sure.
Or having happen in their health journey or, season of life, hormone changes, all those things, really focusing on that community.
So if you had to summarize sort of just like the benefits of running, what would you say, what would be like your top 5?
Oh, just 5. Boy.
Well,
honestly, I think there are so many values in running. I mean, it just helps you strengthen your mind. It helps you physically. It is one of the best ways to something from an actual physical standpoint and outlet to get your body moving and to stay moving. A body in motion stays in motion. Yeah. And I really believe that it's very inexpensive from a standpoint of entry.
Yeah.
You just, like you said earlier, need a pair of shoes and maybe not even brand new shoes.
Yeah.
That's what really tapped me in college was a broke college student. What am I going to do? I can't afford to pay hundreds of dollars for all these, community athletics. Okay, well, I'll go buy a $60 pair of Brooks shoes and slide them on, and there I go. I can go buy the thrift store, knockoffs for running apparel all day long. And I see, again, so many parallels in life, how to overcome, how to be flexible, how to adapt, how to problem solve. I'll tell you what, problem solving is part of the mental game and part of ultras. You are constantly problem solving. And so the more you problem solve, you're just exercising that part of your brain.
Yeah. And it's not, I mean, it's a real life live fire situation. I mean, it's not like theoretically problem solving. It's actually doing it.
Absolutely. And, I mean, so
you're forcing yourself to do it.
A perfect example, I was just on a long run last weekend, and I run with my 2 Vizslas. And so they've now become my full-time sidekicks on the trails, and they love it. And so I've been exploring canicross options. And canicross is really just racing with your dogs. And they are what they call pullers. Yeah. So they naturally have a tendency to pull you straight from your core, and they run fast like bullets. So they really have to learn your pace and style and commands and all of that. So they're a year and a half old, and they've been running and training with me since they were 7 weeks. And one of them actually, so not only am I problem solving for myself now, but now my 2 dogs. So one of them was with me, and we were in the middle of our run last week, but we were far enough away and I had nobody to call. And I shouldn't say nobody, right? In an emergency, I'd find a way to call someone, but my family wasn't home. And the dog had caught her toenail on probably a piece of glass that was on the trail, and it was bleeding all over. And I thought, oh my gosh, what are we going to do now? Yeah. But luckily, problem solving, high gear. I always carry kind of a first aid pack on me. Sure. Tried to make sure it was controlled. It was good. She wasn't, limping necessarily at that point. We continued on to keep pushing. And at one point then she started limping. We had to cut the run kind of short, make a beeline for back to home and call it. But it was just making me realize not only am I problem solving now for myself, but my dogs
for the dog too. Yeah. Well, it's funny, when I did my marathon and I had my dog, we did all the training, and he did the marathon too.
That is awesome. Yeah, that is awesome. And I know how meaningful that is, because when you build those bonds, yeah.
So when you run with the dog, do you use a like one of those leashes that has the bungee attached to it, or do you kind of let them run on the side?
No. Yeah. They are still young, and they still have their squirrel moments. Indy, I call her my trash girl. Yeah. Anytime she finds a piece of trash, she's got to go inspect it and try to get to it. And then Coda, my other one, who is my dead animal kill girl. So she finds all the dead animals that we come across.
And loves to roll in it. And
loves to just, anyway, she can get her mouth on it.
Dogs love to roll in stuff that smells terrible.
It is. So we've found this really great system from a Norwegian product and brand company overseas.
What's it called?
It's Nonstop Dog Wear.
Okay.
And they actually have these amazing harness style systems that are called free motion that really allow the dog's natural gait, essentially, and their motion and range to be fluid and easy and natural for them without having it pull anywhere with hot spots or points or hard,
that's interesting.
Hard points across their backs or shoulders or anything. And it keeps the system, the harness I wear then for myself, keeps you from actually being thrown out of balance with your core or your back. Yeah. So it pulls actually from more your hips, and that focal point displaces any of that stress that may be caused from them giving you any sort of jolts or pulls. You don't tend to feel it as much.
I mean, his Vizslas are, 50, 60 pound dogs? Basically?
Ours are pretty little. Okay. So ours are 31 pounds. Okay. And so they're on the smaller scale for sure, but they are between that 40 to 50 pound, but they are just so powerful.
And you have them both hooked up at the same time?
Both hooked up at the same time. Okay. they kind of know their rhythms in place now. Yeah. They kind of pick their lanes and they go for it, and they know when it's time to run, and they know when it's time to work, and so they love it.
So who puts on these what are they? Canicross?
Canicross races,
Canicross,
yes. They're all over the United States, mostly in the southeast, and then there's some in Wisconsin as well.
Oh, okay. We don't have any in Minnesota yet?
Unfortunately, not that I'm aware of.
That's surprising. You'd think that there would be some, you know.
I would love to participate. So to that point, though, there are some races locally that will allow dogs. I know there's a lot of insurance and concerns around, you know, races being insured for pets to be allowed in the race, but I did run the Ely half marathon last fall.
I've done that one too, yeah.
And that was a pet dog one, and had I known beforehand that they allowed dogs, I would have ran it with my dog.
Oh, they just like the regular half marathon, they allow the dogs? Yeah. Well, I suppose because you're running on those wide roads, I mean, you've got so much space.
It was so great. We were loading up the buses, and people are loading in, and there's all these dogs. I was like, wait, I could have brought my dogs? Yeah. I was like, darn. I'm like, they've done all this training with me.
Do the dogs make you run faster?
They do.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Because they're pulling you a little bit,
absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
Less resistance, for sure.
Less resistance, yeah.
I have to always do a mental check with myself when I'm not running with them. Like, okay, now the paces aren't going to come as quick and easy and smooth.
Yeah.
For sure.
Oh, that's so cool. So... and then you're like for your coaching and stuff, if people are interested in, you know, contacting you about that, like, do you have a website or how do you do that?
I am excited. I don't have an official launch, but the website's in the works.
Okay.
But for right now, I'm active only on Instagram, and my Instagram handle is Wendy Runs Free.
Okay.
And I do have a coaching inquiry link and form on there.
Oh, you
so
do? Okay.
People can go there and inquire, message, connect, and we can evaluate whether it's a good fit, timing, goal alignment, all of that.
And can you coach someone remotely or would you?
That is the beauty.
Yeah.
I can do everything from in person to remotely.
Okay.
So, yeah, I would say most of the athletes that I've worked with thus far have been remotely. Not a ton of in person, because of course there's not a lot of people who are always looking for that. But also, I would say you can hit a larger spanning community and meet their needs where they're at with their journey and their pursuits with their training. So yeah.
And I'm sure there's a big enough network there. You have a lot of friends there that you probably get a lot of good referrals and stuff like that too.
Yeah. So it's only been recent that I've officially launched this. So I'm definitely not one to say I have a Rolodex of 50 athletes under my book right now. I'm really just looking to focus on a few really great individuals who I can give the time and the personalized attention to, that I really believe in and that want to work one-on-one and really strive for that next level. So well, Wendy Krause, thanks for coming in. It was really cool talking to you and learning about all the stuff that you're into. And it's Wendy Runs Free on Instagram, right? Correct,
all just one word?
Yes.
No, and any kind of punctuation? Okay. So be sure to look at that Instagram handle. And it's been a real pleasure. So thank you for coming in.